Hello, and welcome to our presentation on sustainable supply chains. In this presentation, we will be covering a number of topics related to sustainable supply chains. First, we will cover the topic, what are sustainable supply chains and how are they managed? Next, we will discuss statistics related to sustainable supply chains. Then, we will provide examples of supply chains that are sustainable, followed by examples of supply chains that are not sustainable. We will then discuss how sustainability can be achieved and what the steps are. After that, we will analyze the benefits of sustainable supply chains, as well as the drawbacks of sustainable supply chains. Lastly, we will wrap things up with our conclusion. To help understand what sustainable supply chains are, we can look at the definition of sustainability. According to dictionary.com, sustainability can be defined as the ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, or confirmed, as well as the quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources, and thereby supporting long-term ecological balance. Sustainable supply chains can relate to both of these definitions. Sustainable supply chains are supply chains that can be upheld over the long term. Additionally, sustainable supply chains minimize the damage done to the environment and allow for its preservation over time. For companies that are interested in going green and becoming more environmentally friendly, like many companies have been doing recently, having a sustainable supply chain is essential. There are a number of different elements of sustainable supply chain management that help companies minimize their impact on the environment and maximize their resources over the long term. One of these elements of sustainable supply chains is the responsible sourcing of materials. This means that the supply chains gets the things that they need to develop their products from sustainable places. Some companies may pull resources from places such as the Amazon rainforest at rates faster than nature can reproduce the resources. This would be considered irresponsible or unsustainable methods of material sourcing. In order to be sustainable, supply chains should be mindful of their environmental impacts at every step of the supply chain. Sustainable supply chains also use renewable resources whenever possible. Supply chains that rely on fossil fuels when renewable energies can be used are not sustainable supply chains, and as more regulations and restrictions are imposed, the supply chain costs will become less affordable. When renewable resources such as solar energy are used, the initial costs may be higher, but the environmental impacts are minimized and the supply chain becomes more sustainable. While sustainable supply chains use renewable resources whenever possible, they also need to use any necessary natural resources wisely. One natural resource that sustainable supply chains use wisely is water. Sustainable supply chains are not wasteful with the water they use, and they understand the importance of preventing resources from becoming fully depleted. Another element of sustainable supply chain management is that there is a minimal contribution to climate change. The use of fossil fuels and improper waste management can be contributing factors to climate change, so supply chains can be more sustainable by being mindful of these things. By minimizing their contribution to climate change, supply chains can collectively increase their abilities to continue operating within the same environment. The inclusion of recycling programs is also an important element of sustainable supply chains. By having recycling programs, the utility of materials is increased and the impact on the environment is decreased. Supply chains can recycle energy, water, or other resources in order to become more sustainable. When materials cannot be recycled, this waste needs to be managed properly. While doing so may save large amounts of money, when companies dispose of waste or hazardous materials improperly, there can be serious consequences for the environment and society. According to an article from Newsday, Grumman knew that their operations were polluting Long Island's groundwater, but kept it a secret with the help of government officials. This poor waste management is not sustainable. Sustainable supply chains also do not contribute to social or environmental injustices. In other words, they do not subject people to unfair treatment. Some companies may exploit cheap labor or child labor in order to minimize costs and maximize their supply chain surplus. However, this is not a sustainable practice. Sustainable supply chains pay people livable wages and are not contributing factors to injustices. Sustainable supply chains consider their societal and environmental impacts, not just the impact on costs, profits, or the supply chain surplus. The 2020 State of Supply Chain Sustainability Report from the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics provides some very insightful information related to the sustainability of modern supply chains. One takeaway from the report is that the reported level of pressure to be sustainable varies by industry. According to the report, the pressure to be sustainable comes from a variety of stakeholders, not just campaigners like non-governmental organizations, contrary to accepted wisdom. The research shows that this pressure drives action, and the companies who receive pressure are more likely to set goals related to supply chain sustainability. The research from the MIT report also shows that enterprises with sustainability goals tended to favor social goals rather than environmental goals. As shown in the data, eliminating child labor and forced labor was a top concern for most companies, while environmental issues related to air pollution and natural resources were at the bottom of the list. Some of the other goals included community impact, fair trade and fair pay, carbon emissions, and water management. While the research shows that companies tend to have more sustainability goals related to social elements rather than environmental, this preference does not necessarily match with the level of investment made in achieving those goals. The MIT report also provided information on the level of investment in each aspect of sustainability. According to the report, there is a significant disparity between the two sides of supply chain sustainability. While social sustainability is touted as top of mind when it comes to setting goals, environmental goals receive the most investment. As you can see from the data displayed, the level of investment in air pollution mitigation is most aligned with the level of commitment, while the investments made to reach the goal of no child labor are the least aligned with the level of commitment. As stated in the report, knowing which tools translate investments into action helps to guide supply chains' pursuit of sustainability. According to the results from the study, supplier codes of conduct are the most common tools to achieve supply chain sustainability, followed by supplier audits. The report also states that executives express the value of collaborating with supply chain partners and external stakeholders to achieve sustainability goals. Companies can use these tools to develop a supply chain that is more sustainable and environmentally friendly, and the supplier's role is evidently very important. Some of the statistics point towards the belief that the supply chain will continue to play a key role in sustainability, and that sustainability will become a core value of supply chain professionals. The report states that the uncertainties of a global pandemic and a volatile commercial environment cloud the outlook for sustainability, and that some argue that these forces favor a more sustainable future. Others maintain that sustainability will be put on the back burner as these forces play out. However, The research states that social sustainability will continue to be top of mind and may even become more important as a key focus area, and there will be a greater emphasis on corporate transparency. As you can see from the data, very few people believe that sustainability will not be part of supply chain professionals' core responsibilities in the long term.
The first example of sustainable supply chains company will be IKEA. IKEA has invested in sustainability throughout its entire business operations, including things customers can readily see and things they cannot. It starts with their supply chains, where the Swedish furniture maker has sourced close to 50% of its wood from sustainable forestry and 100% of its cotton from farms that meet the better cotton standards, which may then reduce use of water, energy, and chemical fertilizer. You can also see their commitment to sustainability at the store. IKEA has more than 700,000 solar panels powering its stores, and plans to start selling them to customers in the UK. In 2012, IKEA announced its goal to be powered by 100% renewables by 2020, but just 4 years later, it upped the ante, ending to be net energy exporter in the same time. The second example is Unilever. It has done more than make green investments. It's made sustainability part of its corporate identity. The company's sustainable living plan sets targets for sourcing, supply chain, and production on everything from energy and water use to treatment of suppliers and communities where they operate. When it was first adopted in 2010, the CEO said he wanted to double the company's business while halving its environmental impact in just 10 years. It's made amazing strides. Three-quarters of Unilever's waste does not go to landfills, and the share of its agriculture suppliers that use sustainable practice has tripled. The United States Nations awards the company's CEO is championship of the Earth Award in 2050 for its efforts towards reaching its goal. IBM was another early adopter of sustainability and ECO friendly business. Corporate social responsibility and environmental stewardship has been part of the company mission since the 1960s. Its first sustainability report was published in 1990, and its data centuries have received awards from the European Commissions for their long-term energy efficiency success. Today, IBM's efforts include smart building that reduce resource demand, green procurements, water resource management, and more for a truly comprehensive approach. And the examples of unsustainable resources are fossil fuel because they come from the earth and they are not reusable and will someday be depleted. The next example is agriculture practice, like land conversions, pollution and contamination of our lands, air and water, soil degradation and erosions, and wasteful water consumptions.
As we have known what sustainable supply chain and sustainable supply chain management is, next we are going to talk about how to achieve sustainability. According to the research of Professor Dennis, organizations will use a combination of four approaches to encourage sustainable practices throughout the supply chain networks. We can simply divide them into two parts: inside organizations and outside organizations. Inside organizations, the companies usually use direct approach to service suppliers on their environmental, health, safety, and labor practices so that they can use sustainability performance indicators to evaluate first-tier suppliers to know what their requirements are. By using indirect approach, instead of understanding the requirements and the demand from first-tier suppliers, the company provides training to first-tier suppliers to help them manage and improve the practices with the lower-tier suppliers. On the other hand, outside organizations, companies use collective approach to develop industry-wide sustainability standards. Organizations in the industry can share resources to help each other so that they can achieve sustainability goals together. This approach can encourage first and lower tier suppliers to take advantages of sustainability training programs offered by industry organizations. Global approach suggests companies to work with international institutions to improve supply chain sustainability. In last two slides, we have mentioned the basic approaches and strategies. Now we're going to discuss some specific steps. First of all, organizations need to map the supply chain. They need to have a comprehensive understanding of the sustainability impacts of their supply chain. By doing this, they can identify the most significant environmental and social challenges they have. Secondly, it's very important to communicate values and culture to suppliers and customers. Third, once companies know their target suppliers, collecting data from suppliers through questionnaire or self-assessment will provide them an understanding of their starting point. The baseline assessments form the starting point for future programs to improve supply chain sustainability and help assess where the greatest need for improvement exists. Next step is developing training and capacity building programs. This is an important step in improving sustainability and driving behavior changes throughout the supply chain. Step 5 is driving performance improvement. After organizations implement a program, they should start to communicate resource and expectations to suppliers. Companies need to set appropriate strategies and action plans to improve sustainability performance. The final step is joint industry collaboration. Sometimes complex supply chain challenges cannot be solved by individual efforts, and that industry-wide collaboration is required. Working in a pre-competitive environment, peer companies that share similar supply chain can set common standards and best practices for sustainability performance and allow suppliers to be evaluated on the same metrics.
I'm going to talk about the benefits and drawbacks of sustainable supply chains. First, I'm going to talk about the benefits. One of the benefits is that it does value society and the environment, not just profits. It can be upheld for extended periods of time. It can also lead to increased profitability over the long term. It also includes improved reputation among the public, as well as greater appeal to environmentally conscious customers. A lot of times going green and making profit do go hand in hand. It's more of no longer a mutually exclusive type of concept. A lot of times the environmental factors need to be put into consideration when the demand is high, when the demand in the market is high for a particular product or service. The ideal supply chain should be one that benefits people, profit, as well as the planet. And not only business leaders, but a lot of investors are very interested in sustainable supply companies as well. A lot of them have been proven to build trust and reputation, as well as generating higher revenues. And it's not just about environmental factors. You also got to consider social, economic, and legal concerns. And these types of practices are not only good for the planet, but for overall business growth as well. And having more environmentally friendly supply chains can help overall operational costs. And a lot of times these costs can be saved by reducing waste from various factors such as machinery, buildings, and vehicles. And another way that supply chains can be sustainable is by having multiple suppliers in different parts of the world. It also makes companies more attractive when it comes to merging or acquiring with other companies. And it doesn't necessarily mean going green. It has a lot to do, although that's a major component, a lot of the other factors have to be involved with it. That's what overall sustainability means. And now I'm going to talk about the potential drawbacks of supply chains. A lot of times, higher costs, at least the initial type of starting costs, can be higher when it comes to opening up a more green or sustainable supply chain. It can be more complex to develop, and a lot of times it can be more difficult to keep track of. Matter of fact, cost is definitely the largest drawback. 38% of companies have cited that higher costs have made it harder to adopt sustainable supply chains. And other factors have included difficulty monitoring complex supply chains. 29% of the companies have cited that as a reason. 24% have cited organizational structure. And 20% have cited the lack of consumer interests. And 18% cited the lack of expertise. And although there's many different ways of making a supply chain greener, considering that there's hundreds of suppliers, thousands of products, and millions of customers, the concept of making a supply chain more sustainable is more complicated than a lot of us think it is. And the fact that sustainability is not just a long-term trend, it's a matter of fact an indefinite process. It's something that constantly needs to be done. Companies should constantly strive on how they should improve in all areas of the business, not just when it comes to environmentalism. All of the factors have to come into play, and all of the stakeholders that are involved as well as affected need to come into play. And a lot of times, companies, what they should do is compete with each other in terms of becoming more sustainable. That's another way how to use competition instead of traditional type of market competition. And being sustainable, matter of fact, benefits the overall supply chain, and it does improve the overall image for the company, which affects its customers and its competitors alike.
In this presentation, we learned about what sustainable supply chains are, and we can conclude that sustainable supply chains minimize their environmental impact and can be upheld long-term. We can also conclude that there are a variety of elements that make supply chains sustainable, including the responsible sourcing of materials and the proper management of waste. We've also seen how some of the statistics point to the increased importance of sustainability. We've provided examples to show how some companies have sustainable supply chains, while others do not. We've also covered some of the specific steps that can be taken to make supply chains more sustainable, such as communicating expectations. We can conclude that there are advantages and disadvantages to sustainability, but the upsides seem to outweigh the downfalls. Lastly, we can conclude that it is important for supply chains to understand their impacts. All supply chains impact society and the environment in certain ways, and becoming more sustainable can provide benefits for not just the environment and society, but the company as well.